Hi, my name is Sean Devine, and the talk today is about the impact of the Ukrainian war on global warming. The media and the activists, in fact, most people, probably fail to see any connection between the high technology war in Ukraine and its impact on global warming. And this is because of a failure to see the big picture. The war in Ukraine is a big picture issue that affects global warming. And blindness to this big picture will undermine the timid efforts being made to address fossil fuel emissions. We must open our eyes and focus on what really counts. The Ukraine war. Let's get into it. Previously, I argued for a holistic approach to global warming. And you can see the video which focuses on 2 points at the link below. Firstly, the video argues that to reduce global warming, we must have a holistic system framework that sees the big picture. The war in Ukraine is part of the big picture, and failing to see it will undermine our attempts to reduce global warming. And the second point in the video, as outlined by Mark Carney, we need a values approach to set our priorities to achieve our bio-socio-economic objectives. And the overriding value is to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And if we're not careful, other values will displace this and we will not get very far. See the 2020 REIT lectures and Carney's book Values in the description below. Our critical value is to have net zero emissions by 2050. To achieve this, nations must work together to effectively manage emissions. The alternative is global collapse, terrifying. A nation that ignores the effect of war on global temperature, as is happening in the war in Ukraine, is putting selfish power gains ahead of managing carbon dioxide emissions, making it less likely that we will ever manage the global temperature increase. Europe and the United States are in deep denial of their actions in unnecessarily prolonging the Ukrainian war. While Russia is clearly part of the problem, it does seem likely that at the early stages of the war, the implementation of the Minsk agreement would have satisfied Russia, and so it would have limited the effect of a prolonged war on global temperature. War massively increases global greenhouse gas emissions. The continuing escalation in Ukraine shows that any commitment to managing emissions by major nations is a charade. Why should less developed countries sacrifice to support the global rich playing war games? As the following outlines, firstly the effect of the war, and secondly how the current situation where escalation is taking place cannot be justified from a global warming perspective. War releases massive amounts of carbon dioxide. The massive transport requirements of war burn fuel at exorbitant rates. The energy to propel a missile and the destruction of fuel storage facilities, munition dumps, and so on, rapidly increases significantly the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, increasing the global temperature. The increased emissions from smelting the metal needed to replace tanks, equipment, and missiles will increase the greenhouse gas burden even further, perhaps for a decade or so. The replacement of power stations, railway systems, and building structures will increase the greenhouse gas emissions similarly. The warming cost of the war is greater than a realistic peace settlement. The Ukraine war was a direct consequence of the 2014 coup in Ukraine that created a pro-European government. But this marginalized the eastern, the Russian-leaning Donbass area, ultimately leading to a civil war that lasted 8 years or more. and led to human rights abuses. The Minsk Agreement, signed by France, Germany, Russia, and the Ukraine, backed by the UN, ought to have resolved the civil war by allowing significant autonomy to the marginalized eastern states of Ukraine. And even as late as February 2022, President Macron of France pleaded that the Minsk Agreement should be the basis of avoiding the subsequent war with Russia. Too late, nothing had been done for 8 years. Even after the Russian intervention, agreement was possible following the acceptance of the Istanbul Framework in 2022. Final agreement between Russia and Ukraine was close at the end of March in 2022, but Ukraine pulled out. It would seem that it was persuaded by the US to do so. This not just increased the likelihood of a protracted war at the expense of poor, suffering Ukrainians, but at the cost of even a greater impact on global warming. The increase in the atmospheric carbon dioxide will remain for centuries. As 20% of the increased level due to the war today will remain even after 1,000 years, and see the reference to JUICE below. Many are not aware that net zero emissions is only a rule of thumb. We must actually halt the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But there's more bad news. The consequential economic destruction due to sanction by both sides follows a post-COVID inflation and a likely recession. This will mean most economies will be on survival mode for some years. There will be no spare resources to address global warming. How are countries going to limit their use of fossil fuels when they're struggling to survive? So investment will be limited and innovation will be frustrated. A tentative global solidarity is now destroyed as the world is splitting into two factions. The breach of global trust makes it unlikely that the Russian faction will ever trust the collective West over issues like global warming. Why does no one discuss these things? Activists who really cared would now be voicing their concerns about the impact of the war and other things on global warming. Yet people like George Monbiot, the Guardian's guru on global warming, undermines his commitment by taking what seems to be an ideological position over the war. It is right action we need, not righteous activism. Where is the media, who more often than not only parrot the dominant narrative, and who seem to have lost the ability to ask the questions, indeed the very questions I'm asking? We must seek values that override those of seeking power. Whether we're leaders, activists, or the media, seeking truth and honesty will allow us to prioritize what counts. Only then will we see what can be done and actually do it. Otherwise, our children and our children's children will carry the cost of our arrogance. Thank you.